This is the John Oakley Show podcast.
This is a story I'm glad you're going to hear because I don't think it'll be getting much attention, and it should. And I can't say I'm surprised, but I'm sure embarrassed. I am so embarrassed that this has happened, but welcome to 2020's first victim of cancel culture. And we get confirmation today that the University of BC has canceled a free speech event because Antifa-linked groups threaten violence. And that's because the speaker invited to the events is a guy named Andy Ngo, who's the editor-at-large of Post Millennial, and someone who has done an extended amount of coverage exposing things that Antifa does, violent things that they have done over the last couple of years. And he was going to give a speech about, quote, understanding Antifa violence. I mean, the irony should not be lost on anyone. And why is he qualified to speak on this? Well, because while covering these Antifa groups, he himself became the target of things like violence, doxing, physical attacks, including one that happened back in Portland in July, where he was beaten and left with a brain injury. So here we've got a free speech group being silenced now by a university that has chosen, I guess, to side with a group of thugs that now know they can silence anyone by acting like thugs. Andy Ngo is an American conservative social media personality, also editor-at-large of the Post Millennial. He joins us now. Good to have you, Andy.
Thank you for having me on.
You were invited by one of the groups of the school to come and speak at this particular event. What did the university tell them was the reason for canceling this?
I wasn't privy to that particular phone call, but from what I know from the student organizers is they canceled because of security concerns. And from the posts that have been going on online ever since it was announced that I was speaking in December, various Antifa groups and activists have been mobilizing online to call their comrades to show up. Some threatened to assault me. Others were doing campaigns of emailing and phone calls. So there was just, the university was getting press from all these sides. And in the end, instead of standing up for free expression and the free access of information, as is the duty of those in academia, they chose to give in to the demands of the thugs.
Given your experience, and people in our audience won't really understand how you get this expertise, but understanding Antifa violence, how do you have the expertise, and what would your talk have been about to enlighten people?
I live and work out of Portland, Oregon, not too far from Vancouver, BC. And here, Portland has become one of the epicenters of Antifa extremism on the west coast of North America. Ever since the election of Donald Trump, there's just been an explosion of political violence on the streets that happen with regularity, almost to the point where it's become a banality here. And if I had been speaking at the end of this month in Canada, I would have focused on how this American phenomenon, American manifestation of an older ideology is taking root in Canada, and the effects of what's been happening on this side of the border has been spilling over there as well. You may recall the incident of in June at UBC. There was an Antifa demonstration when a free speech group invited a critic of the transgender ideology, and there was violence there. And then, of course, in Hamilton, Ontario, just last autumn, the shocking footage of the riot where the elderly couple were accosted and harassed. So this is happening on both sides of the border. There's violence involved, and with the 2020 campaign year that's happening now, things are going to heat up. People need to be aware of not just of the potential for political violence at universities and on the streets, but the ideology behind it that's motivating it.
Right. I mean, their whole premise and what they say they stand for is fighting anti-fascism. And yet the tactics they use, makes them the very thing that they say that they fight and hate. Why do you think their violence is acceptable when it's not acceptable on the right, and it shouldn't be acceptable on the right? Why is it so acceptable and given a pass on the left?
Well, this is a wonderful question. It goes to something deeper. You notice that in academia for decades in the West, we've never really been able to confront the crimes of the historical and contemporary crimes that come from communism and the far left, whereas the atrocities committed by far-right ideologies like fascism is very well understood. So we have generations of young people who believe that the left can never go too far. So they believe today that the current manifestation of various Antifa networks is that they are justified in doing what they do because they're opposing the right wing, the far right, that they're standing up for quote unquote the oppressed. So they can do, by any means necessary, they can do whatever that needs to happen to shut down the opposition through harassment, intimidation, property destruction, and of course, violence against individuals.
And clearly you are a target. I mentioned the physical attack that left you with a brain injury earlier in the summer, but they've doxed you. And for those who don't know what that means, I mean, they will send out your address and show up, I guess, at your home. You are a very clear target. How far do you think they're willing to go?
I think if need be, they're willing to kill as well as get themselves killed. 2019 has been a particularly deadly year for various Antifa extremists, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. In Tacoma, Washington, one of their militants launched a attack on the Immigrations and Customs facility, tried to ignite a 500-gallon propane tank and got himself killed. He came armed with a gun. So, they're launching attacks. They're primarily usually not trying to target regular citizens, but rather things that represent the state, such as law enforcement. However, as the movement is also relatively decentralized and doesn't have necessarily a leader, they have a lot of rogue elements where some of the extremists can target people, as we saw what happened in Dayton, Ohio in the summer of last year, where an Antifa extremist killed 9 people.
Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom is demanding that the university reverse its decision or they will face legal action. I'm not sure what the university will do. I'm not sure how much pressure will be put on them to change course. But again, if they bend to this group, that means they've given victory to oppressors, to those who don't want to hear other opinions. And I think it's a very dangerous precedent to set. Do you get the sense that they're feeling like they will change their position?
The university has not made any public comment ever since the demand letter was sent and the press release that was sent out earlier this morning. So we can only hope they do the right thing. I think legally, the case that the legal advocacy group has taken on my behalf, as well as the student group's behalf, is on strong ground. However, just on the moral position, if regardless of what people may think of my views and my writings and my reporting, it really is the death of academia if it does not protect the access to information.
Not to mention, in trying to silence you, you're getting far more attention probably for this speech and the issue at hand than you would have had they just let you go and have your speech.
Well, that's the potential silver lining in all this.
We'll stay tuned. Andy, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll continue following and see what position the university, if they plan to take one, decides to take. We'll keep in touch. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me on.
That is Andy No. If you want to follow him on Twitter and see where this goes, it is NGO is the spelling of his last name, and worth following. Even if you disagree, don't agree, and it's Mr. Andy No on Twitter. But even if you disagree with him, to learn the other side of what's going on. Because if you see some of these protests and you see some of the tactics these guys pull, it is outrageous that it is not being dealt with. It is being ignored, that it is being fueled. You saw the garbage that went on at Mohawk College. I mean, give me a break. That, that universities here are buckling to this garbage is not just gross, it's dangerous. It is dangerous that you would fuel that kind of behavior.
Thanks for listening to the John Oakley Show podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe for free at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you get your on-demand audio.